Good afternoon, students. Today I'm going to be lecturing on glittering vices and the chapter on vainglory, chapter 3. One of the things that's somewhat interesting to think about. I don't know. I'm certainly not committed to this, but you might think that different generations, maybe different epochs, eras, ages, have different struggles or different vices that they're leaned towards, and maybe also there's sort of different virtues or something like that are a bit more prominent. uh I think a lot of people probably think that vainglory might be this generation's, or maybe the last couple generations, primary or most prominent vice. So this is a very interesting vice. I think it's one that is, the vices are very relevant, and one of the things that I love about the vice tradition is that they're all extremely relevant. Um, and they're not just relevant to an era or a culture, they're relevant to each person's life in various ways. But vainglory, maybe it is a bit more relevant than some of the others, at least in terms of society, in terms of sort of a cultural or generational vice. And maybe part of the reason for that is the increase in technology, the rapid increase in technology, and the rapid increase in social media. And so things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, those might lend themselves. They might. So it's not as though those things are bad in themselves. Certainly they're not. It's that if we're already sort of struggling with something like vainglory, if that's already something sort of uh, built into us, or we're inclined towards uh, that particular vice, then Facebook, Twitter, it's just going to exacerbate the problem, right? It's just going to intensify it, magnify it, compound the problem in various ways. So, you might think of that with respect to lust too, right? It's not like lust is new. Lust has been around forever, but with the emergence of the internet and easy access to pornography and things like that, lust just takes on new forms. Maybe it takes on new intensity because it's just easier to get uh, materials that enhance and intensify the lustful behavior that's already there. And so vainglory may be a vice uh, that is being intensified right now because of our inability to uh, regulate social media and the internet in various ways. I don't know. You could certainly disagree with that. I've read persons who think that's probably right. I'm certainly not committed to it, but it's interesting to think about. Okay, remember as we go through these vices, there's a number of things that I'm going to be highlighting that are not highlighted in the book. And so one of the things I'll always try to highlight, I'll always try to remind you about is the privation theory of evil, and how each vice perverts, twists, distorts, corrupts something that is by itself good, something that is by itself maybe even wonderful and amazing, and then this vicious way of thinking or this vicious types of behavior comes in and twists that thing that is by itself perfectly good. I'll talk about that today. Remember, I'll apply this particular vice to the story of creation and fall found in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. So that's going to be something that I'm going to do every time. And then I'm going to highlight, various other things as we go through. We'll try to make sure that we distinguish the vice from things that might sort of seem like it but aren't quite it. We'll talk about the daughter vices, the offspring vices, the behavioral sort of more visible manifestations of that vice. And then we'll talk about various types of remedies. And as always, I'll post on the blog uh, different exercises you can engage in for diagnosing yourself. Is this a particular vice that you're struggling with, or behavior that will lead to this vice, and ways of curing it, ways of dealing with that vice, eliminating those behaviors, those attitudes from your uh, thoughts. Okay. Um, so the definition of vainglory that's found in your book, and most of the definitions of the vices that are found in your book are going to be coming from uh, Saint Augustine, or Thomas Aquinas, and most of them will certainly be influenced by Thomas Aquinas's account. Probably, let's see. I've spent a decent amount of time studying the vices from various thinkers, and I would say Aquinas has the most penetrating and interesting analyses of the vices. Most of the definitions you're going to find in the book are heavily influenced by Aquinas, and certainly this one is. So the definition that you get in Glittering Vices is that vainglory is the excessive and disordered desire for recognition and approval from others. So vainglory is the excessive and disordered desire for recognition and approval from others. So it's really important to note those sort of exaggerated or intensified um, terms in the definition, right? So you've got excessive and disordered. So remove those, and what we have left is desire for recognition and approval. So the idea then is our desire for recognition and approval from others, that's not the problem. The problem isn't wanting, desiring, seeking even recognition and approval from others. It's when that desire becomes excessive and disordered. So, vainglory, like all of the other vices, the vice of envy, sloth, all of the other vices, vainglory, its primary location is in our heads or our hearts. It's attitudinal. It's about our desires. All of the vices, fundamentally, what they're doing is they're disordering our desires. Or another way of putting it, St. Augustine puts it like this, that sort of all sin is really disordered loves. So I love pizza and I love my wife. If I love pizza more than my wife, there's something deeply problematic. Um, I love the Dallas Cowboys, and I also love, my students. I love my job. If I love the Dallas Cowboys more than I love my job, that's a disordered desire. Now, maybe if I'm a Dallas Cowboys player, well, then loving the Dallas Cowboys and loving my job end up being one and the same. So, Augustine, Aquinas, much of the Christian tradition, and even outside of the Christian tradition, you find authors that are talking about our lives go well when our loves are ordered or arranged properly, and our lives go quite poorly when our loves, our desires are arranged improperly. In fact, as I said, St. Augustine thinks that's the essence of sin. The essence of sin is having disordered desires or disordered loves. That's it. That's all sin is, on Augustine's account. Just disordered loves. So, vainglory takes this one thing, this desire for recognition and approval from others, and it starts to become, right, that desire starts to become vicious, starts to become harmful and damaging to the vainglorious person when it becomes excessive, when it becomes a disorder. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But remember, the heart of it is a desire for recognition and approval from others. The vainglorious attitude starts perverting that, twists that, makes it an excessive desire for recognition and approval. So let's think about the root words here. Vainglory. We have two roots, vain and glory. Something is vain if it's ultimately empty in its form, right? Um, it's idle. And so the vain here, right, is referring to a recognition and approval um, that is sought for something that is not really worthy of it. Um, So it's a vain, it's I'm seeking recognition and approval for something that really doesn't deserve the level of recognition and approval that I'm desiring. So I just want, I deeply want recognition and approval, say for, growing a beard or having brown eyes or something like that. That doesn't deserve a great deal of recognition and approval. Um, and so when I get, and I'm striving after, and I'm finding great joy in in that recognition and approval that I'm getting from having a beard or whatever, uh, I'm flirting with, I'm engaging in vainglory. Think about persons who take a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction in their looks. Now, for the most part, we did not do a dang thing to get the looks that we have. Maybe you might, my wife or some family members might think that, uh, not only did I do nothing to get the looks that I have, but I've actually screwed them up by growing this stupid, hideous, ugly, thick beard. Um, so maybe we can screw up our looks a little. Maybe we can enhance our looks a little, but for the most part, right, we're not doing dramatic changes to our looks, and yet we take great pride in our looks, right? I mean, we seek recognition and approval in our looks, and it's something that sort of we're proud of. We take satisfaction in. And so part of the idea is that there's a kind of a vanity in that. And the reason it's vain is because it's just simply not worth the amount of recognition and approval that we're wanting from it, right? So we want lots of recognition and approval for our looks when our looks are it's just not worth that much recognition and approval. In other words, there are other things that deserve more recognition and approval, and we're failing to value those things. Right? So, as a professor, and I come from a family of people who teach, it's easy to start, to see this. Maybe I'm wrong, but, I think teachers, educators, they deserve a great deal more of recognition and approval than our society bestows upon them. But entertainers and athletes, now I got no problem with entertainers and athletes making a good living doing what they're doing. Not at all, and certainly this is. But think about the amount of recognition and approval we give to them. What are we saying? Right? We're saying that that kind of function in society is more valuable than this kind of function in society. Right? We're approving of some things much more highly than we're approving of others. And if we're getting it wrong, if those things are not really more valuable than these other things, then we're gonna have a screwed up culture. We're gonna have a screwed up society, right? So remember the recognizing and approving of the entertainers and the athletes and all that. There's no problem with that. But once we start moving them to a level of recognition and approval that their role does not inherently merit, we have a disordered culture, a disordered society, right? And when we do it culturally, we're going to have a malfunction in the culture. When we do it individually, personally, in our own hearts, we're going to have malfunctioning, disordered hearts. Okay, so the vain in vainglory has to do with getting recognition and approval for something that is not worthy of it. And then the glory, this is an important portion here. The glory is an attempt to get glory, right? To have some kind of excellence for yourself at whatever cost. Okay, so you can think about glory. The way that I think about glory, and again, this is piggybacking on stuff Augustine and Aquinas says, the way that I think about glory is that glory is a display of an excellence. Okay, so think about athletes again, right? I mean, watching athletes do their thing, professional athletes do their thing, baseball players, basketball players, football players. There is glory that is being displayed on uh, on those fields, on those courts. There's glory, there's excellence that is being showcased, and it's wonderful and marvelous and worthy of recognition and approval. Absolutely. Uh, The person who studies long and hard and displays excellence in their speech or in their writing, or in their understanding of particular, right? That's an excellence. There's glory there. So when you put these two together, what you have is an empty excellence. It's an excellence that isn't worthy of the recognition and approval that it's getting. That's what vainglory is. Okay? Um, so there's all sorts of fascinating things to say here. I hope that's clear. If it's not, add a comment on the blog and I'll try to clear it up for you. Vainglory isn't, we shouldn't confuse vainglory with pride. Pride is the desire, to be the best. Remember, vainglory is just the desire to get the recognition and approval from others at whatever cost, whether or not you're the best. Okay? So, um, uh, you might think of it like this. The vainglorious person just wants others to notice them for something, anything. It just doesn't matter anymore. They might have started off with what we would call pride, this desire to be the best, to outshine all others, to tower over others in whatever, subject matter or whatever game or whatever it is that we're thinking about. So pride might start off as pride, and then you can see how it would quickly become vainglory. Think about the person who gets a lot of recognition and approval for genuinely having some excellence, and then that recognition and approval starts to diminish in their life, but they want the recognition and approval still, so now they'll do anything to get it. Let's say they're no longer the great basketball player, the great boxer. They're no longer the great musician. They're no longer the great scholar, the great writer, the great speaker. And so now, they used to get a lot of recognition and approval. They're not getting it anymore, and so they start doing other things in order to get that. That's how pride quickly, sneakily slips into vainglory. Vainglory isn't ambition. Dr. DeYoung tells us it's not ambition because ambition has to do with being recognized by the right people, whereas vainglory is not discriminating in that way. Vainglory wants recognition and attention from anybody. So again, you can see how ambition could easily lead to vainglory. So the ambition person or ambitious person, think of my field, right? Say some of you are like, oh yeah, yeah, that guy's smart or that guy's whatever, or maybe some of you think, no, I hate that guy. If I was ambitious, I'd be like, I don't care, hate me, love me, doesn't matter to me. You're not the audience that I really want to get approval from. The audience that if ambition was something that I had, then the audience that I would want approval from would be, fellow philosophy professors or, fellow academicians or something like that. Your opinion of me wouldn't matter at all. But you can see how that can easily slide into vainglory. Suppose I'm getting that, or suppose I'm not. Suppose I'm not getting the approval and the recognition from my cohorts, from my peers. Well, then I might seek it from people who aren't my peers, from people who don't have the expertise. Or maybe I used to get it from my peers and I'm not getting it anymore, and so now I seek it from anybody. So, pride and ambition can easily slide into vainglory. Vainglory, you might think of it as this. Vainglory is sort of, it's where pride and ambition are pointing to. Okay. The vainglorious person then is the person who remember the nature of the virtues and vices. If you have the vice of vainglory, you're seeking recognition and approval, without thinking, without reflecting. It's just a part of who you are. It's second nature. If you're not there yet, but you catch yourself sort of wanting recognition and approval, at various times and in various places, then you're well on your way to getting the vice of vainglory. But you don't have the vice of vainglory until it's sort of built into you, until it's second nature and you engage in vainglorious thought and in vainglorious behavior unhesitatingly and unreflectively. An example that I used to use, and I'm not sure that if this example works very well anymore, but Miley Cyrus, I thought, used to be an interesting example. And I want to be careful. I'm not trying to say that I know all of her motivations, her intentions, that I understand and know her heart in any way. But from an outsider perspective, there are certain behaviors that are indicators, right? So, I gave you the example of the physician. If the physician sees symptoms and then attempts to diagnose the underlying cause. If you get the diagnosis right, then you can provide a cure, a remedy that can really help eliminate the disease and thereby get rid of the symptoms. If you diagnose those symptoms wrongly, then you're gonna prescribe a remedy that could really do great damage. Okay, so from an outsider perspective, looking at some of Miley Cyrus's past behavior, maybe not her recent behavior, but past behavior, you might think that there was vainglory or vainglorious behavior going on, right? Wanting recognition and approval for anything and everything. So you've got some weird videos of, I don't know, like licking wrecking balls and sledgehammers and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen a ton of her stuff, but I've heard stuff of her like on stage doing all sorts of weird, crazy stuff. Um, and so that looks like this is someone who has some genuine talent, right? I mean, I think Miley Cyrus actually does have some genuine talent. She's got some, she's a good singer. I don't know if she writes songs, but some of her songs, maybe the lyrics are decent. I don't know. But so she's got some genuine talent, but the recognition and approval that is accumulating or coming her way based upon the talent alone, maybe it wasn't enough, or maybe it was a great deal and she really liked it and wanted more and more of it, and so started engaging in some of this bizarre behavior to continue to get more and more recognition and approval, right? So vainglory it might start off with mild things, and then the trajectory of all of these vices, the result, if they're left alone, if they're cultivated, if you get the vice and it becomes a part of you for years and years and years, they all culminate in utter disaster and utter ruin of lives, both the person who has that vice and the people around them. Now, thank God, for the most part, people rarely ever get to that amount of fruit, to the most heinous kinds of fruit of the vice, simply because they die early. Maybe they're constrained by societal constraints and punishments and things like that. But if left unchecked, all of these vices are going to result in murder and rape and all sorts of terrible things. Thankfully, they don't, because they're not left unchecked. Society steps in, courts step in, death steps in, things like that. Okay, so some of the offspring of vainglory are things like hypocrisy. So the hypocrite, right? The hypocrite is the person who wants others to sort of see them in a particular way, even though there's no real internal motivation to become that. Plato has a wonderful sort of analogy. It's called the Ring of Gyges, and it's about this guy. He's a farmer. He's digging out in the fields, and he stumbles upon this ring. He puts it on, and he notices that when he twists it a particular way, he becomes invisible. This is a dialogue, by the way, that was written, 2,700, 2,600 years ago. It's a fascinating tale, and so the idea is, what would you do if you found a ring like that? And one of the characters in the dialogue says, that they'd go around and they'd literally like rape people, kill their enemies, steal tons of stuff when they turned it invisible. And then, when it was visible, they'd somehow, pretend like or try to figure out a way, to say they accumulated this wealth legitimately or something along those lines. So that's a great example of sort of the hypocrite, right? The hypocrite wants to be perceived in a particular way, even though the reality is quite different. That's an offspring vice of vainglory, is radical hypocrisy, this double life that you lead. Boasting, right? This kind of boasting, drawing attention to yourself all of the time, putting yourself at the center. So, one thing that sometimes I'll catch myself doing, and it's kind of embarrassing when I catch myself doing it, and it's really, of course, it's really annoying when I catch others doing it, is the one-upsmanship, right? So you've all experienced this, I'm sure. Maybe some of you are guilty of it, where someone is telling you a story about their vacation over the summer, and immediately you're thinking about your vacation, and immediately you're starting to tell your story about your vacation and the crazy adventures that you have. Or someone tells you about this wreck that they were in, and you start telling them about this wreck that you were in that was 10 times worse than theirs. Or they're telling you about their children's achievement in school, and you're immediately responding with your children's achievement in school, right? So that one-upsmanship is a sign of someone who's on the path to acquiring the vice of vainglory. Dr. DeYoung puts in her book, and this one I thought was a really brilliant sort of addition here, the love of novelties. And so this makes a heck of a lot of sense, right? And I think, the stereotypical guy has this with respect to like electronics. That's the stereotype. I know obviously lots and lots of women, have this desire for the new shiny objects, the electronics and all that stuff. And, the stereotype for women is, the new clothes and the new makeup, right? What's hot, what's in, what's fashionable this season or something like that. So the love of novelties, the love to be in, right? I've got the new Mercedes, I've got the new laptop, I've got the new iPhone, I've got the new TV, I've got the new shoes, right? I've got the new whatever, right? And so the idea is that in most cases, there's no reason whatsoever to get those things, right? There's no real need for them. And so Dr. DeYoung thinks that in many of those cases, if we examine our hearts, what we will discover is that we're getting those things because we want others to recognize something in us. We want people to see us, right? We want people to approve of us, to give us a mental thumbs up. That's what we're wanting. And so you can see how this vice of vainglory can produce in our lives behaviors and attitudes that can really get us into some real trouble. So if I don't get the new iPhone, think about the sorts of behavior I might engage in if vainglory is really set, if its claws are really in me deeply. I might be willing to steal that new iPhone. So I'm going to engage in theft, not from greed, notice. And I'm not engaging in theft, for out of envy. If I'm I'm engaging it because I want recognition and approval. So remember the physician analogy here. Someone steals. So let's say we've got, three people in front of us who stole iPhones, and I'm supposed to, let's say that you're the spiritual doctor and you're going to help try to understand the causes of their behavior. Well, it's very well the case that those three people stole for completely different reasons and out of completely different underlying spiritual maladies. So one of them might have stole out of greed, this desire for more material possessions. One of them might have stolen out of envy, right? Maybe their rival has the new iPhone. The person that they constantly compare themselves with has that new iPhone, and they cannot imagine going another day without it. And so they steal out of envy. And then the other person, maybe they stole, right, because they just want everyone else to see, hey, I got all the new stuff. I'm cool, I'm keeping up with everybody. I'm not left behind, right? And so they steal the new iPhone or the new whatever for that reason. So we've got three people who stole. They exhibited the exact same behavior, but for very different reasons. One of the things that I love about the Vice tradition is it doesn't demand us to flatten our lives, and it recognizes the complexity of our hearts and our minds and the behaviors that we engage in. So let's get back then to what's the good thing that vainglory perverts? Well, above we talked about how it's obviously a desire for approval and recognition. Vainglory takes the desire for approval and recognition and it perverts it. It twists that fine desire. And so one of the things to think about here is that the desire to get approval from others is really, I think, the desire to be made known, for me to be known by others. I want others to know me. I want you to approve of me. I want you to know who David is, and you want me to approve of you. Now, in an online class, those desires are probably fairly minimal since we have hardly any contact with each other at all. But you get the idea, right? We want others to know us. I want to make myself known in the world. I want others to know me. I want others to love me. You want to be loved. Um, think about it like this: we're all essentially social beings, right? So we flourish in community, we flourish in relationship, and we diminish, right, in when we're out of community, when we're out of relationships. Uh, we have this deep desire to be known and to be loved by others. And so vainglory takes this natural, wonderful appetite of ours, this wonderful desire of ours, and twists it for various reasons. So it's important to see how vainglory is built out of something that is itself very good and great. Right? So we are people, we are creatures who need to know that we are known. It's not just that we are known, we need to know that we are known. Being known is not enough. And so, this is one reason why the knowledge of God is so important. So, God knows David. Yes, God knows you. Yes, He knows you inside and out. But I also need to know that He knows me. Right? I need to be aware of that, conscious of the fact that He knows me inside and out and approves of me. He recognizes and approves of me. And so if I don't know that I'm recognized and approved by God, then I'm going to seek it from others. Now, in the Christian tradition, the reason I'm recognized and approved is because of Christ. Christ is recognized and approved. His life, his perfect life, is recognized and approved. And I am now united to Christ. And so, because I'm united to Christ, I get the approval that is rightly directed towards Christ, right? If it's just recognition alone, according to the Christian tradition, I'm screwed because there's no way for me to get approval because of how twisted my heart really is. But by uniting myself to Christ and his perfection, then I get both the recognition from God, he knows me inside and out, and I get the approval. If I don't if that doesn't make sense to me, or if I'm not a Christian, then the vice tradition is still applicable to you because it says you're going to seek to be known elsewhere. So you're going to do it online, or you're going to do it at bars, or you're going to do it with friends, or you're going to do it with colleagues at work, or you're going to do it with your family. Maybe, so long as your children are approving of you, yay. But man, as soon as your children start growing up and entering those ages where they don't like you anymore and they think you're lame, you're uh your those desires for recognition and approval aren't going to be met, and you're going to meet them elsewhere. So this is one reason why we see marriages, there's these fascinating sort of places statistically where marriages struggle. So at the 7-year mark, marriages struggle more than they struggle at others, or it's like 6 to 8 years, whatever. Marriages struggle empty when the nest is empty. Well, you can see why. Maybe the mom, maybe the dad was getting a lot of their purpose and meaning from the recognition and approval of being a mom, being a dad, from the kids, needing them all the time. That's gone. They're not getting that recognition and approval elsewhere, so they start seeking it outside of the home, and marriages break apart in that way. There's a fascinating doctrine that I want to talk about that's connected to this, and this doctrine is a famous ancient and medieval metaphysical philosophical idea. It's called the diffusiveness of goodness. The diffusiveness of goodness. That's Diffusive, diffuse, the diffusiveness of goodness. Diffusiveness. So the ancients and the medievals, they believed that it is the nature of goodness to spread itself, to diffuse itself, to flow forth. So goodness naturally flows out. Goodness naturally spreads itself. Okay, it's diffuse, right? It goes wherever it can, right? So a good person, right, is going to be someone who naturally their goodness gets extended, gets applied to whatever circumstances they are in, right? Their goodness it's impossible to be invisibly good in a sense, right? Um, and so many argued that this nature of goodness itself, this diffusive nature of goodness, that it flows outward, that it pours itself out, many argued that that actually explains the the why God created. Since God is essentially infinitely good, and goodness is necessarily diffusive, it necessarily pours itself outward. God created because he's good, right? He made other things because his goodness it couldn't be contained within. It had to spread out. And so now think about this in relation to the vice we're talking about. So we, created in God's image, are similar. We want ourselves to be known, right? We want our goodness to shine forth. That's part of the desire to be known. There is something wonderful about each one of you. And so the natural desire is to share that wonder, to make it known, right? And so we want the glory, the goodness, the excellence within us to be displayed. That's just the nature of goodness, the nature of glory, right? Now, if our focus is on David's glory, Kim's glory, or Frank's glory, if our focus is on our own glory, and that's what we're really wanting everyone to see and recognize, then vainglory is just, a few steps away. But if we recognize, according to the Christian tradition, right, the glory that I have is borrowed glory. I have it because I'm an image of the one who is infinitely glory, infinitely excellent, infinitely good. So my glory, in a sense, is not my own. My goodness, in a sense, is not my own. It's given to me because I'm created in God's image, or it's given to me because I'm clothed in the righteousness and perfection of Christ. So then the key to avoid vainglory in the Christian tradition, the key is to want God's glory to be spread. So it's not that it's bad for people to recognize the goodness in me or the glory in me. It's that I want that to point them to the goodness and glory of God, the one who gave me my goodness and glory and excellence. If I want them to just stop and hover on the goodness and glory of me, that's moving towards vainglory. So the goal is to get God's glory displayed in all its possible manifestations. You can think of it like this. Think about these passages in Scripture that talk about light, right? The light we are called to be. We're called to be a city on a hill, right? We're supposed to shine forth God's glory, not ours. And so, you've got John the Baptist. He says, Christ must become greater and I must become less. Right? Man, that's powerful. If you are a Christian, that is, do you really want that? Is that something you really deeply want? Christ to become more and more recognized and you to just fade into the background. Right? If I'm honest with myself, that is not always my desire. But man, I want that to be my desire. Or at least right at this moment, I want that to be my desire. Or I'm just, you know, making it all up for your sake. I hope that's not true. Okay, so now let's apply this to the garden. Do we see this vice in the fall? Well, I think given all the background that I've given you, I think you might be able to come up with some clever ways of where does this show up in the fall? Where does this show up in the garden story in Genesis 1, 2, and 3? So here's one way. Think about covering up, right? You've got this story in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Adam and Eve, they sin, right? They eat the forbidden fruit. They want to be like God. They want to know good and evil just as God does. They don't want to be discoverers of good and evil. They want to be the inventors of good and evil. So they eat they eat the fruit, and then suddenly they notice they're naked, right? Now I think there's lots of metaphor here. The nakedness they notice, I think, is first and foremost a nakedness of their soul, right? Their soul is exposed to each other, to the world, to the serpent, to God. And so what do they want to do? Well, they've just done something heinous. Right? They've tried to dethrone God and become the creator of good and evil in their own lives. So they want to cover that up. They want that hidden. So you know the story. They cover themselves with fig leaves. Again, I think there's some metaphor here. There's a great hermeneutical principle. When you read the Bible, the visible is always an indication of the invisible. It's always a manifestation of the invisible. The physical reveals the non-physical. The visible reveals the invisible. And so this covering of the body is a revelation of our desire to cover our souls. So we hide from each other, we hide from God, we hide from ourselves. So we try to cover up our sin with things, and they're never good covers. So we distract, right? We try to distract others from who we are by covering or pretending that the mess we're actually in isn't present. Or think about the way lots of people point out the mess that they're in, right? And sometimes that itself can be a covering, right? Look at me, look how awesome I am. I'm not afraid to show you how terrible a person I am, right? And so notice what I get. I get some recognition and approval for being gutsy enough to share with the world, how lame I really am, right? So what's going on here? Well, in my heart, I'm so twisted in my heart that what I'm really wanting is the recognition and approval for my guts, my courage in displaying, all these terrible things that I'm struggling with. Think how twisted we can be. Vainglory is fascinatingly complex. So our covering is often empty and vain, and ultimately it's absurd. Ultimately, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because by trying to cover up, we are necessarily covering up something. And if we try to cover up the cover up, we're launched on this infinite regress of cover ups that simply delays the obvious. We're trying to hide ourselves, and at the same time, we want to be seen. That's the absurdity. I want you to know and to love me. The vainglorious person wants to be known and to be loved, and yet the thing that is known and loved is not the person. It's a facade. It's a cover up, right? It's an image. It's a persona. It's a fake whatever, right? So I'm desperate for desire. The vainglorious person is desperate for recognition and approval from others. They get it in many cases, and yet they're left completely empty because it turns out that what's getting recognized and approved isn't them. They're not being known. It's not them that's being loved. It's this persona. It's this facade, right? It's this fake. It's this cover up. So in the fall, we get cover up, and I think there's where we start on the road of vainglory. So I think vainglory can really illuminate our reading of the fall in Genesis chapter 3. Almost done, just another couple minutes. Remedies. Dr. DeYoung talks about silence and solitude. Those are powerful remedies, I think, here. An hour a day in silence and in solitude, where you're completely separated from any distractions whatsoever. Man, you get to know yourself in some powerful ways. And, most of the time, at least at first, what we discover isn't great. I think another way, and here's some other remedies, is attempting to shine the light on others and not on ourselves. Right now, we need to be wise about this because, of course, it's possible for me to pretend to be moving into the background to shine the light on my wife while I'm really sort of wanting everyone to see how awesome David is for shining the light on his wife, right? And that's just a clever way to get the light shown upon me. So one way of doing that is to make sure that the light is shown upon God. But of course, pastors and persons who even do this explicitly in their job can be as vainglorious as anybody. So we've got to be careful, right? I mean, this is a vice that is psychologically twisted and complex. One way that I've sort of thought about as a remedy for vainglory, is to constantly remind myself as a Christian that I am an actor in God's drama, and the drama that God, the creation, history, providence, I think of this all as sort of grand narrative, this grand story drama that God is writing. I'm an actor in this drama, and ultimately it culminates in His glory. Remember, His glory is a display of His infinite excellence and beauty and wonder and amazing features. So, this drama of history, of the creation of the world, culminates in His glory. The story then is all about Him. Necessarily, it has to be, since He's the most excellent being of all. The story is all about Him, it's not about me. Right? How could it be otherwise? Right? Scripture says, "In Him we live and move and have our being." All of my being, all of my excellences, all of the goodness that is within me and with you in any part of the world is ultimately just from Him. It's just a display of His excellence, of His glory. Right? So we're either actually intentionally displaying His glory, or we're attempting to display the glory of another. But nothing else has the glory that God has, and so our attempt to display the glory of another, ourself or something else other than God, is always going to come up short. Right? It will never be as satisfying as displaying the infinite excellence and glory of God. I'm not the main character of the play, in other words. You're not the main character in the story that God is telling. God is the main character. Now, according to the Christian tradition, I get to play a supporting role in that story, and that itself is amazing.